We've talked about agreements. What does the Act say about the enforceability of mediated agreements?
Okay, so mediated agreements, I think they're also called settlement agreements in the Act. This is also an important piece of the Act because in the past there have been no specific provisions in relation to the status of mediated settlement agreements. And what the Act says about them is that it is for the parties to determine if they agree and what form that agreement or that settlement agreement should take. What is interesting is that the default position, so unless the parties specifically state that the agreement is not to be binding on them, that the default position is that the mediated settlement agreement will take the form of a contract. Okay, so that is very important for mediators to be aware of, for solicitors supporting their clients in mediation to be aware of, as they'll often be the ones who are called on when it comes to agreement stage. And of course, for parties, particularly unrepresented parties, to be aware of, that if they agree on something and they ask the mediator to write it up or they write it up themselves, if they don't specifically say this agreement is not binding, it will have the legal status of a contract and can be enforced before the courts as any other contract would be. So that's important to note. The other thing is that there are certain exceptions to this rule in relation to family law because parties might require a divorce or a judicial separation. And also when it comes to applying to the court for enforcement, the court can refuse to enforce certain mediated agreements in the family domain if they don't, for example, look after the best interests of the child, or if the court feels that full financial disclosure hasn't been made, or that one or of the parties wasn't able to fully represent their views at the mediation. So the court has a sort of a backup role there to ensure in family matters that the mediated agreement that's being enforced is actually in the best interests of all the parties, particularly the children.
Okay.